Good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to present Stephanie Kim, a 2011 junior researcher and a PhD candidate in education at the University of California, Los Angeles. She has an MS in Global Affairs from New York University, as well as a BA in English from the University of Michigan. She will soon be finishing her successful Fulbright grant year in Korea and return to her studies at UCLA. Stephanie Kim came to Korea to study the integration of the Western pedagogical model and its impact and influence on Korean student culture. She has attempted to create an analysis of an international college that explores the professional activity of stakeholders within the university context. In an effort to minimize Korea's educational trade deficit, the Korean government has enacted measures that discourage students from studying outside Korea, meanwhile encouraging foreign students to study at the universities in Korea. The policy this requires Korea to raise Korean university educational and research standards. Further, the government is striving to make internationalize campuses so to better accommodate foreign students. A specific product of this trend is the adoption of Western liberal arts educational models, with international colleges being conducted entirely in English. Using liberal arts as the point of entry into the discussion of Korean education, Stephanie examines the social, economic, and political debates regarding the university internationalization. Her research has led her to argue the rise of international college as a manifestation of the Korean model of globalization. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Kim. Okay, let's welcome.
Today I will be talking about my research project. I have been in Korea for the last 12 months conducting a study on university internationalization. How I'm going to organize this presentation, first I will talk about the background and the larger social context of university internationalization policies in Korea. Then I will go into a case study of an international college that I've conducted. And then I want to talk about some of the preliminary themes and issues that I've discovered and what this means in defining a Korean model of university internationalization. So, higher education in South Korea. There are three types of institutions, national, public, and private. The difference between national and public education is to educate the people, but specifically national institutions are designed to meet the state needs of Korea. So this could be national universities of education, perhaps agricultural institutions, and of course you have your national universities, such as Seoul National University. It's important to note that the vast majority of higher education institutions in South Korea are actually private. All higher education is highly centralized and governed by the Ministry of Education, and also given advice by the Korean Council for University Education, which is an NGO. So just to give you a breakdown of the kinds of institutions in Korean higher education, the blue part represents universities. Approximately half of the institutions are universities. The next largest section, that brown slice, represents junior colleges. But for purposes of my presentation, I'm going to look at reforms in the university sector. Just to give you an overview of some trends that have happened, higher education has rapidly expanded since the decades following the Korean War. This is the number of institutions starting from 1960 to 2005. You can see that the number of institutions has increased dramatically. Alongside that, student enrollment has also increased dramatically in the same time period. This is a breakdown of the numbers. You can see that in each period that higher education institutions and enrollment increased significantly. I do want to point out, if you look at 1985, the number of institutions actually decreased. This exception is due to the years following the assassination of Park Chung-hee and the military dictatorship that eventually took over Korea during the 80s. The military dictatorship at the time shut down a number of higher education institutions because university students were quite active in the protests. But you can also see that in that same time period, student enrollment surged as students flooded to the universities so they could partake in the political activities. However, more recently, when you look at the trends starting from 2000 onwards, the population of Korean domestic students has actually been shrinking. This shows the trends in the number of entering freshmen in Korean higher education. It peaked at about 2004, but since then it's been steadily declining. And when you look at the numbers, you can see starting after 2004, the numbers have been steadily declining as well. This is due to a number of reasons. One is the low birth rate of Korea. As you are probably already aware, South Korea has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. And also, Koreans are flocking to overseas colleges increasingly for their education. And you can see here the trend starting from 1991 into the 2000s. Koreans dramatically went abroad for their higher education. Looking at the numbers, there are a few exceptions. In 1999, the number actually decreased. This was shortly after the Asian financial crisis. And then more recently, the slowdown, you can attribute it to a couple of factors. One would be just general global economic recession. And the other reason is perhaps a direct consequence of some of the policy initiatives that the Korean government has enacted, which I will talk about in a minute. So I'm throwing around all these terms, globalization, internationalization, and I want to define exactly what I am talking about. Now, I am looking at this through a higher education lens, and so this is how I am defining them. I'm defining globalization as the economic, political, and societal forces pushing 21st century higher education toward greater international involvement. And what do I mean by internationalization? I mean that it is the methods through which higher education institutions respond to globalization. And some scholars have also found that internationalization is found to signify predominantly a search for student markets domestically and abroad. So this leads to the question, why are Korean universities trying to internationalize? Well, there are a series of reasons that led to this. First, in 1995, when the WTO was formed, it listed higher education as part of its tradable services. Additionally, in 1997, following the Asian financial crisis, South Korea was pushed to adopt a set of economic reforms that emphasized deregulation, marketization, competition. In other words, it pushed South Korea towards a more neoliberal bent, and with this, higher education became a list of tradable services that could be bought and sold. As we discussed earlier, there is a shrinking pool of Korean domestic students alongside an increasing pool of Korean overseas students. Now, lastly, this all leads to something called the global competition phenomenon in higher education. And this is acutely affecting Korean universities, but this is also something that is affecting universities all over the world. To talk about what the global competition phenomenon in higher education is, I'm going to list a number of factors that have created this. So to explain what I mean by the global competition phenomenon in higher education, this started with the rise of global university rankings. such as the Shanghai Jiaotong rankings, the Times Higher Education, the QS World Rankings. These rankings effectively placed higher education institutions from one country in direct competition and comparison with those in other countries. And this was the first time this was being done. And this led to the rise of world-class universities. Now, there is a lot of debate on what exactly a world-class university is, what that term even means. But in general, scholars agree that world-class universities produce a high quantity as well as a high quality of research. This is directly related to the next point I want to make, cross-border quality assessment. Countries such as South Korea, that have traditionally and historically not have had high research output in their universities, have looked to countries such as the United States that historically have had universities with high research output. And they've looked to these countries to assess their own quality standards of their universities. This is happening in many places, such as South Korea, all throughout Asia, Europe. Effectively, the US research institution becomes the model for which every other higher education institution in the world is comparing itself to. At the same time, there are regional units developing. For example, in Europe, you have something called the Bologna process that allows students to easily study abroad in universities in other European countries. Something like this is starting to form in Asia, though it's still in the very early stages. And student mobility. Now, more than ever before, students are able to study abroad for their higher education. They're increasingly diversifying where they go. They're going earlier, not just for their graduate education, but also for undergraduate and even earlier. And all this has led to something called academic capitalism. Academic capitalism is the notion that knowledge is no longer a public good. Knowledge is a commodity that can be bought and sold. And universities are increasingly becoming marketers and suppliers of this knowledge. And students are increasingly viewed as customers of knowledge. These are some of the recent reforms that South Korea has enacted in the higher education sector. I'm going to focus on the first three because they directly deal with issues of globalization and internationalization. The BK21 project is a push by the government to nurture a select group of R&D institutions in the hopes to turn some of them into world-class universities. The Study Korea project is a push by the government to import foreign students to Korean universities. And the World Class University project is a push by the government to import foreign faculty to Korean universities. The BK21 project was phased in two parts. The first part lasted from 1999 through 2005. The government invested what is equivalent to about $1.2 billion US into a select group of research institutions. And the hope is that the Korean government could obtain at least 10 world-class universities through this investment. How it measured its success is through the number of SCI publications produced. What I mean by SCI, Science Citation Index, it is an international index of highly regarded journals in the world. And the Korean government has measured its success in this project by the number of articles published within SCI journals. In terms of quantitative markers, the project was a success. When you look at the same period from the late 90s to about 2004, the number of SCI publications has been increasing steadily. In 1998, Korea was ranked 18th in producer of SCI journal publications, but in 2004 it was ranked at 13th. The second phase of the BK21 project started in 2006, and it is just recently coming to a close in 2012. And this is a push by the government to actually create a different kind of system, to increase the human capital output of Korean universities. So Rather than measuring it by quantitative markers, this is a bit more qualitative and a bit harder to measure. I have yet to see a report on the success of how they measure the second phase of the project, just because it's closing so recently. But to increase the human capital of Korean universities, it does this through 3 methods. One is to produce experts, particularly in key growth-generating fields in science and technology. 2 is to upgrade the infrastructure of universities to increase research output. And 3, to develop regional graduate schools in order to increase research output outside of Seoul. The next policy initiative is called the Study Korea Project. And this was launched in 2004. And this is basically a push by the government to transform South Korea as the education hub of Northeast Asia. It does this through 4 methods. 1, to increase foreign student enrollment. 2, to increase the publicity of South Korea as a study abroad destination. 3, to improve the infrastructure to appeal to international students. And 4, to improve the administration and support of universities to also appeal to international students. When you look at the success of this policy, it was quite effective. When you start from the early 2000s into the latter 2000s, foreign student enrollment increased dramatically. This is a breakdown of the numbers. In more recent years, degree programs as well as non-degree programs such as language programs and continuing education started to be offered. This also increased foreign student enrollment in Korean universities. I also want to add that the largest sender of international students to South Korea is China. Lastly, we have the World Class University Project. This was launched in 2008 and will continue into 2013. And thus far, the government has invested the equivalent of approximately $730 million into Korean schools, with the hopes of increasing the foreign faculty in Korean universities. And it does this through 3 initiatives. It invites foreign faculty to establish new departments in existing universities. 2, it increases initiatives to hire additional full-time foreign faculty. And 3, it pushes money to invite distinguished foreign faculty as visiting scholars. A direct consequence of these internationalization policies is the rapid transition into English. When you're increasing the incentives to teach in English, bringing in foreign faculty, bringing in foreign students, and rewarding those who publish in English, you are going to effectively create English as the language of scholarly communication. Today, approximately 3% of all courses available in Korean higher education are offered in English. When you look at the SKY universities, Seoul National, Korea University, Yonsei University, they offer up to 1/3 of their courses in English. And the premier science and technology institutions, KAIST and POSTECH, have pledged to provide English as the sole language of communication. There is a lot of literature surrounding this issue, and in particular at KAIST, I believe last year when the president announced this pledge to transform all its curriculum into English, there were a string of student suicides. And it's quite a tragic response. This is also linked to a policy that the president had announced where if your GPA were to fall below a certain number, then you would have to pay back any scholarship money that you were given. And so this, in conjunction with a pledge to transform everything into English, placed a lot of pressure onto the students. Another direct consequence of these reforms is the rise of international colleges. These are colleges that are conducted entirely in English and attached to a Korean institution. Ewha Women's University opened the Division of International Studies in 2001. This later merged with its honors program to become what is now known as Scranton College. At the same time, Korea University also started its own Division of International Studies in 2002, it's remained the Division of International Studies. And Yonsei University started what is called Underwood International College in 2006. There are some major differences, and to explain what they are, the Division of International Studies is effectively still a major within a Korean university. Korean universities are very much divided by what major, by the major, and this is how they split their curriculum, their faculty, their administration. When a student enters a Korean university, that student declares a major, and they begin taking classes within that major all 4 years. The Division of International Studies, while they are conducted in English, their major is international studies. However, Scranton College and Underwood International College are a bit different. It's a college. They come in without declaring a major. They declare one in their latter 2 years. And Underwood was the first college of this kind to happen in Korea. It is conducted entirely in English, but they spend their first 2 years in a general education curriculum, then move into a major in their latter 2 years, very much like a US university. So I've chosen to take a look at Underwood International College as a case study of a kind of model of university internationalization. The first class of Underwood International College entered in 2006. The curriculum is conducted entirely in English. All faculty of this college are international. No Korean citizen, as a policy, will be hired as a full-time faculty of this college. Today there are approximately 700 students, and annual tuition is approximately equivalent to $12,000 US. It's important to note that this tuition rate is about double what a Yonsei student would pay in a traditional department. The mission statement of UIC. The mission statement reads, the mission of UIC is to bring together students from a diverse range of national and ethnic backgrounds, providing them with a rigorous, world-class education that stresses the following core values: creative and critical thinking, democratic citizenship, global leadership. When you look at the history of the leadership of UIC, this is a list of UIC deans. You can see that in the early years, leadership was dominated by faculty from the Graduate School of International Studies, and only recently was a faculty from the English department chosen to lead UIC as its new dean. I do want to note that while UIC hires international faculty only, the deans have thus far only been Korean faculty from other departments in Yonsei. No UIC faculty has ever been the dean of UIC. This is a categorization of the faculty working within UIC. There are faculty designated as common curriculum and faculty designated as international campus. They're effectively the same in terms of decision-making ability, teaching load responsibilities. It's just that the international campus faculty have responsibilities of teaching courses in the Songdo International Campus, whereas the common curriculum faculty will teach courses primarily in the Shincheon campus. There is also a third category of faculty called joint appointment. Joint appointment are those faculty that are also international. They're hired by UIC. They teach most, if not all, of their courses in UIC. However, their decision-making ability lies in whatever other department at Yonsei they have the joint appointment with. In terms of the breakdown of students, there are 3 kinds of students that would enroll in UIC. Korean students, Korean overseas, and international. Korean students are those who have spent most, if not all, of their educational background in Korea. They've graduated from a Korean high school, and now they're here at UIC. Korean overseas students, on the other hand, they are Korean citizens. However, they've either spent at least 3 of their high school years abroad, or have spent 12 or more years abroad in general. And international students are foreign passport holders. In terms of breakdown, Korean students still are about 75% of the college. whereas Korean overseas and international are about 1/4. Korean students' admissions also falls within quota. And what I mean within quota is that each department within a Korean university has a quota into the number of students they're allowed to accept. This creates a lot of politics between the departments on increasing their quota numbers. However, if you are designated as a Korean overseas student or an international student, you are considered outside of quota, meaning that UIC can accept as many students in these categories as it wants, and it will not affect any decision-making quota ability. This effectively creates different admissions rates, whether you're considered Korean or not. It is about, in looking at the statistics, it's about 3 or 4 times harder to get in if you are a Korean student than it is if you are Korean overseas or international when you look at the admissions rate. Still, though, UIC has not reached its desired proportion. Their desired proportion is to have 50% Korean and 50% abroad. Right now, they're about 3 to 1. The curriculum is where you see the biggest difference. UIC students enter and spend their first 2 years in a common curriculum that is based on a US liberal arts general education model. Then they spend their latter 2 years absorbed into a major that is held within one of the departments at Yonsei University. On the other hand, Yonsei students will declare a major coming in and be absorbed by that major from the beginning, and that will become their identity for their entire 4-year college program. There are some newer programs that UIC has launched starting in 2012. There's something called the Asian Studies Division as well as the Techno Arts programs. Those are 4-year programs housed entirely within UIC. They are not absorbed by another major in their latter 2 years, and they are housed within Songdo International Campus. However, both of these programs were just launched this past spring semester, and so the effects and consequences and the politics of these programs has yet remains to be seen. So what am I looking at here? Well, what is the Korean model of university internationalization? How does this reflect the Korean attitude towards globalization? And on a secondary level, I'm also looking at how the various university stakeholders navigate their professional activities. So how does the UIC educational model affect international faculty in their professional development? How does the UIC educational model affect the Korean student experience? In the last 12 months, I've conducted an ethnographic study at Yonsei University. I've conducted about 45 in-depth interviews lasting anywhere from 1 to 3 hours each. My formal affiliation with Yonsei was that of an international exchange student, so I had access to most of the classes there, and so I conducted a lot of classroom participant observation as the status of my international exchange student allowed me to. And in addition, I've collected a number of documents in order to support my analysis through triangulation. Some of the documents include dean statements, marketing materials, etc. I'm going to talk about some of the themes and issues I've discovered throughout my study. These are all preliminary. A lot of this data is still fresh in my own mind, and so I haven't had time to really fully sort this out or really go into depth with my interview coding. But I'm just going to talk about some of the gut insights I've had in my research. Establishing an identity. On an institutional level, UIC is very much the international face of Yonsei. It is what Yonsei presents to the rest of the world. That was very much reiterated to me both by UIC faculty, by the Korean faculty from other departments at Yonsei, as well as the UIC leadership. When speaking to the international faculty, I found that they actually have a dual-track navigation in their professional activities, and I'll talk about this further in a minute. And from the students, from the Korean students at UIC, there's actually a lot of ambiguity in what identity they possess, and I'll also talk about this in a minute. Faculty identity. An overwhelmingly common response I heard from the faculty there is that they navigate different publication requirements. On one hand, the Korean university requires and rewards them to publish journal articles, and it does this through a point system. However, particularly for humanities faculty there, while they are rewarded for journal articles, most of their gravitas as a scholar comes from the publication of books. However, books are not as highly regarded in the Korean system, and so they navigate both. They sort of learn how to play the tenure track game within this Korean institution, but to be taken seriously as an international scholar, they also have to have a number of book publications that aren't necessarily rewarded in their tenure stream. And so this actually creates dual requirements. And they have this dual identity. Korean universities also require a high level of administrative work that would normally be given to a separate admin staff, but in Korean universities, the international faculty, or the faculty anyway, pick up the administrative responsibilities. At UIC, this includes student recruitment, marketing, things that would normally be sent to an entirely different department within a US institution. And this leads to basically having dual identities, one within the Korean institution and one as an international scholar. I also want to talk about this issue of flight risk. One problem that UIC has had is the retention of faculty. They tend to hire faculty that are younger, that are straight out of a PhD program, and some of these faculty do have very deep ties to Korea. Perhaps they have family here, perhaps they're married to a Korean citizen, but on another hand, some faculty do not have very deep ties, and the institution has not cultivated this sense of this sense of investment within Korea. It's created this international bubble that these faculty work within, but this oftentimes creates flight risk. Perhaps when the time is right, when they've built up their CV, these faculty will drift to another institution. In terms of student identity, the most common theme I found is that they didn't have any strong student identity. They could not identify with their major that they were absorbed in the latter 2 years because they spent their first 2 years sequestered from the major. Therefore, there was very little interaction between UIC students who declared, say, a political science major with Yonsei students who come in as the political science students from the beginning. They also have no strong alumni network because it's such a new institution. They don't have many students to ask questions about in terms of networking capability or what to do, generally just personal advice on what to do. The first graduating class finished in 2010, and so there are very little alumni out there. And then there's a sense of egalitarianism. Because they spend their first 2 years within this common curriculum, it really creates a sense of camaraderie. And this is in direct contrast to the Korean system where you have Sundaes and Hubes. The Sundae Hube system is when Korean students who enter into their freshman year very much look to the upperclassmen. It's good and bad. They're given a lot of duties that take up a lot of their time, but they're also given a lot of guidance. However, this system is attempted to be completely eradicated in the UIC system. And you have constant comparisons with Yonsei students. UIC students are Yonsei students. However, they're also highly sequestered from other Yonsei students. And they don't follow the same traditions, the Sundae Hube tradition, the major tradition. And so there is a constant comparison and contrast. Also, UIC students have a completely different admission system than a Yonsei traditional student. The Yonsei traditional student normally will take the sunung, the college entrance examination. It is a grueling examination that Korean high school students take. Based on a certain score, they're able to get into a certain university with a certain major. However, UIC students do not take the sunung. They apply through a more qualitative method that includes essays and test scores and grades, as well as an interview. And it's determined by the UIC faculty directly whether or not they're admitted. However, I did find that some of the Yonsei traditional students I've interviewed did not take the student either. These days, Yonsei students can also opt to take something called the sushi, which is also a kind of qualitative way where they look at your essay, they look at some of the extracurriculars and civic activities that you've done outside of school, as well as your sunim score if you opt to take it. And isolation. UIC students, because they're smaller in number, because they don't have a strong major identity, they feel very isolated. And they don't necessarily feel a strong connection with a UIC identity. Perhaps they feel strong camaraderie with each other. But when asked what major they are by other students, they don't, they say I am UIC, but with some hesitation. They don't have this strong sense of pride in their school. And this creates a sense of isolation and inferiority. Just in sheer terms of spatial orientation, this is the Yonsei campus. If you look in the middle, I'm going to go up there at a point. Underwood Hall is about right there. And most of the Yonsei students take classes in this area. However, this is where UIC is located. It's called the quote-unquote international campus. It's actually the basement of the Graduate School of International Studies building. And it just shows in just sheer spatial orientation how sequestered UIC is and how Yonsei views the importance of UIC, or perhaps the centrality of UIC. In addition to being sequestered on the Shinchon campus, now there's something called the Songdo International Campus. This is basically an investment by Yonsei to purchase some land in the city of Incheon to create another branch of Yonsei. The gray area represents what the campus will be. However, it's not there yet. The green area is what exists right now. I visited Songdo a couple times to get a sense of the place and to interview some first-year students. And it's very much very barren. It looks like this. It's basically a construction zone. This is an aerial view of Songdo. As of 2010, all UIC freshmen were required to spend their first year in Songdo and then spend their latter 3 years in Shinchon. However, this dynamic might actually change though, because starting in 2013, all Yonsei University students will be required to spend their freshman year in Songdo.
Wow.
Additionally, the Asian Studies Division, yes, all Yonsei University students will spend their freshman year in Songdo.
That's
interesting.
I do want to add that the Asian Studies Division and the Techno Arts Division of UIC will be required to spend all 4 years of their college experience in Songdo. This is just to get a sense of how far Songdo is. Yonsei is here, Shinchon.
Yeah.
Incheon is here. That's where Songdo is. No, I took a direct, when I went to Songdo, I would take a direct shuttle that left directly from the Yonsei campus and dropped me right at the front gate of Songdo International Campus. That direct shuttle took me 90 minutes one way. If you opt to take the subway, door to door, it would take approximately 2.5 hours. Despite these sort of tensions happening, there are still a lot of positive changes that I found, and this is particularly true of the group of students I interviewed. I was really struck by some of the thoughtfulness of their responses and some things that I've gleaned just from talking to them. On one hand, the students who graduate from UIC, they really do have impeccable English, not just on a conversational level, but in terms of their academic writing, their fluidity of expression. These are Korean students who really have beautiful English. And I don't necessarily find that in some of the students I've spoken to, perhaps in traditional Yonsei students. There are, of course, exceptions. This environment also truly fosters their critical thinking. Not to say that other Korean students are not capable of critical thinking, but the environment of UIC really promotes and fosters critical thinking. UIC students, I found on the whole, are quite worldly and idealistic. There are those who perhaps opt to choose what are considered safer majors, such as economics, and go into the corporate sector of Korea. But there are a good number of students who don't, that they are open to newer ideas, to newer cultures, to befriending non-Koreans, to living and traveling abroad, even if they wish to return to Korea in the later part of their life. And lastly, they're very familiar with the Western academic culture. These students spent 4 years being instructed under the tutelage of Western, generally Western, but international academics. They understand what that requires. They understand when to speak up in class, when not to, what the writing and the communication style requires. But perhaps a traditional Yonsei student is not necessarily enculturated to that aspect. However, there are a number of issues that are also arising. On one level, there is the institutional obsession with external image. UIC, as a young institution, is very wary of how it is perceived by others outside of UIC, particularly outside of Korea. It's very much focused on its marketing. At the same time, there's a very strong tension between the UIC international faculty and Yonsei at large. As with any healthy body of faculty, they are openly critical, they question things, they speak up, but Yonsei, as a Korean institution with a long history, is not used to dealing with this kind of tension, and so it really creates this sort of what the faculty want versus what Yonsei wants. And I found, I'm going to share an anecdote, it also has to do with the external image. A couple of faculty actually shared this with me. There was a candidate for a UIC faculty position, and he is of Korean heritage but adopted, and he was raised and spent all of his educational life in Europe and wanted to become a UIC faculty. There's actually some pushback from Yonsei because he appeared to look Korean, that would not add to their international image, which in a sense is, I think is very silly, it's stupid. You hear these kinds of stories happening perhaps in private hagwons, but you don't necessarily hear of these stories happening in the more established and prestigious universities. And to hear this kind of stuff happening at an institution like Yonsei and at an institution such as UIC, it really raises a lot of questions on how obsessed you should be with your image versus your reality. Eventually this professor was hired and he is currently there. But this only happened because there was a lot of pushback from the other UIC faculty into hiring this qualified candidate. At the same time, you have a lot of containment of critical inquiry. UIC, as an institution, fosters critical thinking in its students. It touts critical thinking as its highest value. However, it does not allow this critical inquiry to be directed at itself. And this is where a lot of the hypocrisy lies. I interviewed one student. She was part of the first cohort who started in 2006. At the time she started, there was a lot of publicity surrounding this new international college. What does that mean? What are her experiences? And so a Korean newspaper contacted her for an interview to give her opinion on her college experience. And so she did. She was quite honest. She gave them some good points as well as some negative points. Shortly after this interview was published, the dean at the time personally called her and told her, next time you are asked to give any kind of publicity like that, please come speak to us first.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is the containment of critical inquiry coming from UIC specifically, or from faculty, the international faculty on the staff there? Is there a difference between, I'm asking, is there a difference between the international faculty and the Korean leaders of the UIC?
Right. Well, I find that the faculty are sandwiched in a very awkward position.
Yeah.
They are international faculty. They've received their PhDs abroad. However, Yonsei University is their employer. And so while they may be openly critical at times, there's a lot of careful mincing of words too. Perhaps not quite as open as a UIC student might be in terms of open criticism.
Well, what I'm asking is the faculty containing the criticism?
The faculty containing the student criticism. I did not find that so much. It was mostly the leadership.
Okay. Just curiosity.
Another point I want to make is that there is a lack of socioeconomic diversity. Yonsei students are privileged for Korean students, but on top of that, UIC students are especially privileged. Not just because they pay higher tuition than the rest of Yonsei, but the fact that they can operate in English at an academic level really points to the fact that they've been trained to operate at this level of English from a very young age. And this goes back to a lot of family support in their English-speaking capability. Perhaps they were early study abroad children, perhaps they went to a foreign language high school. But the bottom line is this requires family resources. And this is not the fault of Yonsei or UIC. It's a larger structural problem of Korea, of creating haves and have-nots in English. But the fact that UIC is positioning itself as a leader of international education, I do think that it at least needs to recognize and address this issue that's developing. And also there's a sense of privilege that comes, yes?
Ask this question now or save it?
Maybe save it towards the end, just so I can get through this. Next, there's a sense of privilege that comes obviously with the lack of socioeconomic diversity, but also with their sequestering and with the higher tuition. UIC students, I found that they want special treatment. They're given special treatment and they want special treatment, but the institution, I find, fails to also imbue a sense of humility that I find is important in creating not just a global leader, but a democratic citizen, as its mission statement claims that it does. And it really goes with the lack of socioeconomic diversity, I find. And lastly, you have unintended consequences. A really unexpected consequence that I discovered when interviewing these students is that while they have beautiful English and can operate in English at very high academic levels, they actually cannot or do not feel comfortable doing so in Korean. However, these are Korean students who are graduating from Yonsei University, and perhaps they would like to spend some time abroad, perhaps not. But the fact that a lot of them do want to spend most of their life in Korea, perhaps in the longer term, and the fact that they cannot or do not feel comfortable operating in Korean at an academic level really points to some glaring oversight on the university, that perhaps it is focused so much on the English aspect of international education. It fails to address getting these students Korean levels at the same level. So, in a sense, you have a bubble. You have this really cool international college. However, it's working in the confines of Yonsei University. It has a long history, it is well established, and it is a Korean institution. Within Yonsei University, you have very long established, powerful departments. And these departments also have very complex politics and relationships with one another. So within this whole system, while the international college is quite new and radical, it really gets lost in the chaos that is Yonsei. And oftentimes it's either unknown or ignored or forgotten. And also in the political sense, perhaps it does not have as much clout in the greater Yonsei decision-making ability. So I want to talk about what this means in defining the Korean model of university internationalization. Inbound globalization. Traditionally, Korea has been outboundly global, meaning that it sends Koreans abroad. Now they're trying to reverse this system by importing international students. However, when you look into the purpose of UIC, on one hand, it does attract international students, But the subtext of this is that it also keeps very talented Korean students to stay in Korea who would otherwise study abroad. And in a way, internationalization can also be read as anti-internationalization. You also have a separation. There's the structural segregation of UIC as a college within Yonsei. Very much on the spatial level, it's pushed out to the side of the campus, just in terms of the way the departments are structured, the way their faculty are placed. It doesn't have a whole lot of interaction with the rest of Yonsei, and so there is a lot of structural segregation, not just with UIC, but how Korea deals with sort of the international aspect. At the same time, UIC is given a lot of special privileges, and there are high stakes surrounding UIC. While there are a lot of problems, and whether or not other Yonsei faculty agree with its mission or disagree, there is general consensus that UIC must succeed because it is almost a litmus test case for internationalization at Yonsei. And so, regardless of the problems, there is vested interest in everyone there, within UIC and outside of UIC, that it must succeed as an institution. On the other hand, while UIC delivers Western education, it is very much couched within the terms of Eastern values. What do I mean by this? Well, one, you have national protectionism. Strangely, Koreans want Korean faculty to have foreign degrees. However, Koreans are very protective of things Korean. They don't want actual foreign institutions creating branch campuses in Korea. And in a way, this has created a very harsh environment for that to happen. While they want to internationalize, there's a strong sense of national protectionism. At the same time, Koreans expect education to be funded privately. You see this with the UIC funding structure and the greater Korean higher education structure. And this creates social competition and university hierarchy. And Koreans are very comfortable with that. At the same time, while education is funded privately, research is publicly funded. This is through the government grants that I talked about earlier in terms of creating research output. And all of this can be looked at what some scholars call the Confucian model of education. That while universities are internationalizing, they very much do within a kind of Eastern framework. And this creates a kind of paradox of what Koreans think of globalization. Samuel Kim wrote, "Despite the rising globalization and globalism chorus, deep down, Korea remains mired in the cocoon of exclusive cultural nationalism that acts as a powerful and persistent constraint on the Segewa drive, and that no fundamental learning, no paradigm shift has occurred in the course of Korea's Segewa drive, only situation-specific tactical adaptation." This means that Koreans appropriate globalization as a kind of nationalistic tool. And to explain the sort of paradox of nationalism and globalization, Ki-wook Shin offered these two explanations that are interrelated. One is the national appropriation of globalization. Two is the intensification of ethnic identity in reaction to globalization processes. Just as states can react individually to the harmful effects of globalization, they can proactively maximize the benefits that globalization offers and appropriate them as nationalist tools. At the same time, nationalism can also awaken in response to the global processes that appear to threaten nationalism in itself. And in a way, you can see UIC as this kind of model that while UIC touts the rhetoric of liberal values of globalization, the underlying effect is that it effectively is used to create a stronger Yonsei University, and in turn a stronger South Korea, which is very much a nationalistic goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have time for several questions. Do any of you have any questions?
Yeah, Michael, do you have a question?
Well, when UIC was created, it occurred to me that it was just another, it was a university equivalent of a foreign language high school. watched the presentation on UIC, every single point they apply to the foreign language principle. And I think the question I was going to ask earlier, that way was related to this tactical adaptation. I was going to ask if you saw any potential for real change in that, you're talking about creating global level campuses,
Right.
right? World-class universities. Sorry, this Canada. I'm just coming out of a year at Catholic University in Korea, and one of my colleagues was told when he was hired, this is one of the things that frustrates a lot of foreign faculty, is we're going to put you in a tenure track, but you're not actually tenure track, you'll never get it. We're just going to boost the numbers for making this a world-class university. That tactical adaptation, not really bringing in foreign professors to change in a way the atmosphere or quality of learning on campus seems to be pointing to a pretty negative outcome for all of this.
Right.
If you would agree with that.
Right, no, I would definitely agree with that. I find that with the integration of UIC, I think from an institutional perspective, it's not necessarily to wholeheartedly change Yonsei, it's to make Yonsei stronger and globally competitive in comparison to other universities on a global scale. And it is in the sense that international is really anti-international, or perhaps just national.
We have time for 2 more questions, actually.
I don't, you had your hand up first, so.
Okay. You were talking about the curriculum earlier and how most Korean universities do. Freshmen come in, they automatically have to choose their major and so on and so forth, and it's pretty much stuck on that track. Whereas, of course, Westerner, we have 1 or 2 years before you can declare. Do you foresee Korea becoming more like Western, where they're allowing freshmen to come in and not declare immediately? Do you think that will be part of the internationalization of the universities in Korea?
Yes, I think that UIC is a very early test case of this kind of curriculum. That not just in Korea, but also in places like Hong Kong and Japan and China, they are starting to reform in the sort of general
I'm not talking about UIC, I'm talking about Yonsei in general, or Seoul National in general, the entire university going to that, where they basically, you go into the university, take a course that requires, then you declare. I'm not talking about UIC, I'm talking beyond UIC, Yonsei.
Right.
in general.
I do think that it's a difficult question to answer if you relate it specifically to Yonsei, because within Yonsei, I think they're eyeing this as a potential model, but there are a lot of politics between the departments at Yonsei, and to destroy departments and create a general education curriculum for the first half of the college experience really breaks down a lot of the influence that certain departments might have. Having more classes in a certain department directly translates to the ability to hire more faculty in that department. And so you're really talking about breaking down the entire political structure of Yonsei University. And
You're also messing with the government quota standards.
right.
That's going to be a big problem too. Yeah, you have to do that.
So there was a period where they had a kind of open major, something like this, but it's not a very popular choice for
Okay, thank you.
students. And one more question? Yes.
I guess,
Excuse me, louder.
yeah, I'm interested in kind of, you're saying that there's some kind of internationalization happening at the same time as the reconsolidation of nationalism, right? But you also made a big point of saying that a lot of the people who work within and go to this and are students in the program are very conflicted or have like no strong sense of identity. So I wonder if like you can say a little bit more about that and how that fits into this the theory that you're trying to say about the crisscrossing of globalization, the internationalization, and nationalism.
Well, I really think that the students of UIC have become a contested territory for this. I mean, they are the direct receivers of the curriculum changes. And these curriculum changes are profound for a Korean institution. The fact that they do not identify with a major really goes in direct conflict with what a Korean institution expects of university students. I found that they really do, I think it's too early to tell. The first class graduated in 2010, so how they identify as UNSA students, but how they identify themselves with UIC in the future, I think is also directly related to the status of what UIC will become. But for now, I really do think it's too early to tell in how they position themselves in this struggle. Thank you. I'll be around, so if there are any questions, we can talk after.